Welcome to Talking Pictures. My name is Christian Genzel. I'm a filmmaker and film journalist from Salzburg, Austria. Talking Pictures is an interview series in which I talk to the people behind some of my favorite movies. From cult movie directors to character actors, from seasoned veterans to brilliant newcomers, from celebrated artists to filmmakers who haven't received the recognition they deserve. These folks have lots of fascinating stories to tell. Today's guest is screenwriter Charlie Haas, best known for his work with cult filmmaker Joe Dante. Our conversation focuses on the movie MATINEE, released in 1993, a love letter to the horror films of the 50s and 60s set during the Cuban Missile Crisis. John Goodman plays Lawrence Woolsey, a producer not unlike William Castle, who comes to Key West, Florida to promote his new monster movie MANT, half man, half ant, all terror. The story is told from the perspective of a young boy who loves horror cinema and who befriends the eccentric producer, while out in the real world, the United States and the Soviet Union come close to a full-scale nuclear war during the October crisis of 1962. In our interview, Charlie talks about his own movie-going experiences and his memories of the Cold War, about working with a film scholar like Joe Dante, about the development of MATINEE and the inspiration behind the Lawrence Woolsey character. We also talked about some of Charlie's other work, including the teen rebellion drama Over the Edge, the sci-fi cult classic TRON, Joe Dante's anarchic sequel Gremlins 2, their TV movie Runaway Daughters, and an exciting project they worked on which unfortunately didn't come to fruition. The interview was conducted in connection with the German-language podcast Lichtspielplatz, where we produced an entire episode on MATINEE. So if you speak German, check out our Lichtspielplatz episode number 43 at www.lichtspielplatz.at. If you enjoy my conversation with Charlie Haas, make sure to check out our other interviews at talkingpicturespodcast.com and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and the podcast platform of your choice. So here's Talking Pictures with Charlie Haas. MATINEE is very much a movie about going to the movies, the love of going to the movies. So I was wondering which movie-going experiences you remember from your youth.
Oh, wow. When I was a kid, there was very little to do where I grew up. It was a suburban town with very few entertainments, but there was a movie theater that I could walk to, and I could walk there on a Saturday afternoon and go and see, oh gosh, Rodan, the Japanese monster movie, or I'd see The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance or something, stuff that was coming out at that time, this sort of late 50s, early 60s. And it was wonderful. I mean, and if they had like an Elvis movie or something, they might have a couple of live rock and roll bands before the show, before the movie. And I loved going. I mean, as a family, we went to drive-in movies, and we would go see, the kind of thing we made fun of with the Disney parody and MATINEE. But, but on my own, I would go see Westerns and monster movies and stuff. And as I say, Elvis pictures. It was great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, movie-going was much more of an event back then, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, there would be, I remember that if there was, again, this very much turns up in MATINEE when I think about it, but if there was a monster movie out, I'm trying to remember exactly what was out at that time, but, the Blob and the Crawling Eye and Rodan and all this stuff, and everybody would be talking at school at recess about, well, how scary is it? And can I go see this one? And, tell me what happens in it. And did you have your eyes closed? Everybody was very, very energized by horror movies at that age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the teenage years are that age where you are very, you're very interested in that sort of experience, and you sort of feel that experience very strongly, sort of testing yourself in a way.
For sure. And actually, thinking a few years ahead of that, by the time I'm in high school, by then we've moved and I'm living near a college campus. And so I'm going to see art movies all the time. And I'm going to see, Godard or, Robert Frank or something like that, with that same kind of excitement. It's like, here's this connection to the world that I want to be in. Mm-hmm. Very important to me when I was, 16 or something.
Mm-hmm. Do you still go to the movies?
Uh, Not lately,
Yeah, well,
but yeah, yeah,
let's ignore the pandemic for a moment, but
yeah.
in general.
Pandemic aside, we still do, and we go to commercial theaters. We also go. We're in Oakland, and so we're right near Berkeley. And in Berkeley, they have a university art museum that has Pacific Film Archive, which is an excellent screening series. And
Hmm.
we go see a lot of French pictures and whatever there. But and sadly, our movie going has been cut down a little bit because being in the Writers Guild, I get DVD screeners of stuff
Hmm.
for award season, and we end up watching a lot of stuff that way. So we got lazy about going out. But yeah, I love going to the movies.
Hmm. Yeah, I guess that's true for most people, that just because everything is so available and it's so convenient to watch it at home.
Yeah, it's the screeners that they send, and it's also streaming. So,
Mm,
but it's great to get out. We have a wonderful, very old-fashioned, big old movie palace,
mhm,
really right down the hill from us here, and it's really fun. They have the Wurlitzer organ and the whole thing. It's great to go
mhm.
there.
Wow, that sounds great.
Yeah.
So, which of those movies that you saw back then, which of those were an inspiration for the movie in Matinee for MANT?
Oh, good question. I trying to, because you'd see Godzilla movies and stuff like
Mm,
that. But I think that really, the thing about working with Joe Dante and Mike Fennell, his producing partner at the time, those guys are two of the world's great movie buffs in a way that I never was. I mean, I'm just not as steeped in the movies. Very few people are as steeped in the movies as those guys. And just as an aside, I mean, working in LA when I did, those guys, and I worked with Tim Hunter and Jonathan Kaplan when we did Over the Edge. I mean, these guys were not Hollywood scene makers. They were just very much serious movie scholars. And I really love that about working with them. So, MANT MANT, first of all, originated as part of the movie before I came onto it, because there were a couple of writers who did earlier drafts of it. So
mhm,
that idea was there. But the references, the general and we're going to shoot the ray at it and all this other stuff, the doctors, all that. That really was input from Joe, because he just had a million, and I want to cast the guys in it who were in the real, we
mm,
put them in, and that's really Joe all the way.
mhm. Yeah, I imagine it must have been fun to create a sort of a Mark 50s movie that's almost the real thing. It's just on this side of parody, I guess.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and and shooting black and white and doing all that stuff. I mean, yeah, it really was fun.
Hmm. So the characters in the movie and Matinee itself, I think the heart and soul of the film, that's John Goodman, or his character, the
Yeah.
Lawrence Woolsey character. And again, that draws a lot of inspiration from the 50s, from the William Castle type of producer. So was that already in place when you came on board for the script, or?
It was not. There had been, I think, two writers. I think Jericho Stone came up with the initial idea for let's make a movie about kids at a Saturday horror movie matinee. And then Ed Naha came on and
Mhm,
did probably several drafts. So what Joe and Mike gave me to read was just the most recent draft by Ed.
mhm,
And that was the only thing that I saw, going into it. And I thought it was a lovely script. It was a very nice script about kids go to a Saturday horror movie matinee, and it had the idea of MANT and that stuff. It did not yet have the John Goodman character or the Cuban Missile Crisis or any of that stuff. And we had been talking a lot about William Castle when we were working on Gremlins 2, because Joe was talking about could there be some kind of fourth wall gag in Gremlins 2, which there ended up being with the thing where the film appears to break and you have Paul Bartel and Hulk Hogan and all that stuff. But he pointed out that, because we talked about William Castle, he said, well, William Castle was opening movies in just a few theaters, and he could actually go around and, do the tingler or, whatever the gag was. We can't do that because we're opening in too many theaters. But William Castle, that whole thing sort of stuck in my mind. So that when we started talking about Matinee and they said, well, it needs another layer of, of stuff going on other than the kids going to the movie. And I don't want to claim credit for any particular idea because it was so collaborative and my memory is so dim of, working with these guys. And I think it was very much a shared, brainstorming. But basically what we said was, well, what if you put a character like William Castle in, and what if he is opening a movie, during the Cuban Missile Crisis and it's in Florida? Because I didn't grow up in Florida, I grew up in New York, but I vividly remember being 10 years old during the Cuban Missile Crisis. That was something I never forgot. So, that got added in there. We all remembered fallout shelters and getting under the desk and all that atomic bomb stuff.
Oh, you had those drills like you see in the movie?
We had the drills, yeah.
Oh, okay.
And in fact, one of the things taken from real life in Matinee, when Lisa Jacobs' character, the sort of beatnik girl, makes the speech about, this is pointless because here's how you're really going to die of radiation and all that stuff, which to me is a wonderful speech. And I get to say it's a wonderful speech because I didn't really write it. I remembered it because when I was in school at 10 years old and we were having those drills getting under the desk, there was this one girl who got up and said exactly that. She said, this is nuts. You're going to have this horrible radiation. And she described the whole thing and we were, oh my God, we're all going to die. So that went right into the movie. I mean, I never forgot that, her saying that.
It's a very nice contrast to the horror that plays out on screen versus the real life horror that is happening in the world.
Yeah, once we got that idea of real danger as opposed to fake horror movie, going to a horror movie, that fear, that sort of rehearsal of fear, or that kind of ritual of defense against fear, however you want to talk about that psychologically, it became to some extent a movie about that, about real and fake danger and the possibility of confusing the two of them. And that's really what we played on.
Yeah, I think horror movies in general, not just the ones from the 50s or 60s, they're a way to confront your fear without actually having to live through it, and it's always in a very contained manner. I mean, like with the movies like MANT and the real movies like Tarantula and everything, you have the idea of the atomic bomb or nuclear like devastation and mutation and everything, radiation poisoning, but it's told in a way that it's very, you can come to terms with it because it's usually just a monster and you can kill it or you can sort of deal with it.
Yeah, and at a certain point it's going to be over and the lights are going to go up and you're going to be fine. And I think we are thrilled when somebody makes a monster movie and we go see the monster movie and we know and they know that the lights are going to go up and we're scared anyway. And it's so effective that we're scared in spite of all that. And I think that's the genius of something like Get Out or Mulholland Drive or some of these other things where I have really been, even watching that at home, even streaming that, you're in your nice living room and you're still frightened. I mean, that's an achievement. That's good work right there,
Yeah, I had this experience with a couple of ghost movies, like The Ring, for example, and I just couldn't turn off the light that night because it became so real. It touched upon something, some sort of fear, and it's no use telling yourself that, well, okay, it's all fake and it's a movie.
Good luck, and that's good work. Yeah.
So you actually have a speech in the movie where John Goodman. You actually have two speeches in the movie where John Goodman talks about that, where he talks about the first horror movie, the caveman who
Yeah,
drew the mammoth, and then at some later point he talks to the patrons who work in the people who work in the theater, where he prepares them and says, well, they lived through that and their heart can't
yeah,
take it any longer. And then they say, oh my God, it's over. Can I see it again? The kind of
yeah,
catharsis.
yeah, yeah. I like this. Yeah, thank you. I like those speeches. They were fun to do.
Hmm. Yeah, I think they capture the soul of that movie-going experience very much.
Thank you.
So interesting about the Lawrence Woolsey character and the, what's the boy's name, Gene.
Yeah,
I think there's the kind of father and son relationship that they have.
yeah. There is, and of course we're playing on the fact that the kid's father is away and he doesn't know what's happening to him, and it's that's part of the tension there. So yeah, in this nutty way, because the guy is sort of 3/5 con man, but he's still got some human instinct toward the kid, which is nice.
Mm-hmm. And I think it ties in with that moment where the kid says that the people on screen are sort of his friends, people like Vincent Price, they're my friends,
Yeah,
because he doesn't really have too many real friends because he's moving so much.
yeah.
So is that your experience, or is that Joe Dante's experience, or is that just something that is sort of distilled into a character that is a stand-in for every one of us?
I think it's more the stand-in thing. I don't know a whole lot about Joe's childhood, and he would be the one to ask. My childhood was stable. We didn't move, and I went to school and I had friends and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think we were just trying to imagine that military brat thing where you move around, but I don't know. And I think actually that's just because we said, well, why are they in Key West? Well, why is the father not there? Well, he's in the Navy. It's when they, we came up with the fact that there was that blockade ship.
Mm-hmm.
And so that became the kid's background, but it wasn't mine. I don't think it was Joe's at all, but you could ask Joe that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I'm asking because so much of the movie feels so personal. And I know that Joe Dante has talked about how almost autobiographical the film is.
Yeah, I think a lot of aspects of it are for him. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and then some aspects for me, because as I say, the fallout shelter stuff, I mean, I really do remember being so spooked at that age about the bomb. And we would drive around. We'd be in the in the car with my family and driving around where we lived, and there would be these fallout shelter lots. It was like a Christmas tree lot, but they were selling fallout shelters, and they were all these concrete cylinders, and they'd be sitting there and painted in different colors. So it's like, what would you like, an orange one? Would you like a blue one? And you were supposed to buy this thing, have it driven to your house, dig a hole in the backyard, and sink this concrete cylinder into it. And that was your fallout shelter. And they were impossibly small. I mean, you could not have gone through 2 days in this thing. And, there were people who believed in doing that. There were people who thought that was going to save their lives. And it was madness. And as a 10-year-old, you're terrified.
Mm. But did you actually comprehend what was going on there, or was that just a sort of a feeling that
because I was a precocious kid
mm-hmm.
who read the newspaper, and there were people in the newspaper saying, well, what do you think? You're going to live in this thing? So it was, I mean, it was seeing the fallout shelters, but on top of that, comprehending the futility of it,
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that this was just underscoring the fact that we were all going to get blown up. And of course we didn't, but people in Japan had. So what can you say? It was awful.
Mm-hmm.
So that aspect of it, of the kids going through that, it was certainly personal for me, and I think the movie stuff was especially personal for Joe.
Mm-hmm. You already mentioned the girl who who tells everyone what's going to happen to them if there's an actual nuclear war. And I noticed that there are two female characters in the script, and these two are the grown-ups in this world. It's the girl who seems to know more about what's going on in the world than some of the adults do. And there's the girlfriend of John Goodman, who again is she sees through all of his bullshit and all of his showmanship, I guess.
Yeah. The long suffering Kathy Moriarty. I think I think the two of them are wonderful. I very much admire what they did in that picture.
Well, was that something you were going for? That the women are particularly aware of the reality of the situation?
Not consciously, but
okay.
But you make a very good point. You're right.
Yeah, because Woolsey himself, I mean, he's more or less a kid. He's at one point he actually tells the kid that, well, we grown-ups make things up as we go along as well. So he's sort of a kid, and
he's sort of a kid, and also there's another element to him that I should just mention here, which is that to a large extent he's William Castle, but there is also, as Joe pointed out, William Castle was a B movie maker, but he worked in Hollywood. He worked for the studios, and Woolsey seems to be more one of these guys who is outside of Hollywood. Mm-hmm. And Joe sent me a book, and I don't know if he mentioned this to you or if you're familiar with it, but there's a book called A Youth in Babylon by a guy named Dave Friedman. Do you know about this?
I've heard about it, but no, I haven't read it.
Really worth reading if you can get a hold of it, if you get the chance. Joe sent it to me when we were working on Matinee, and it is about Friedman. It's a memoir, and it's Friedman and these other guys who were completely outside of Hollywood. They came not from show business; they came from the world of carnivals. They had been traveling with carnivals in the Midwest and the South in America. And they started, they made these movies, or they got hold of these movies, and they literally were driving around with 35 millimeter prints in the trunk of the car and going into small towns and renting out a movie theater and advertising these things and showing them. And it was things like Mom and Dad, which was this very hokey, sort of sex education cautionary tale movie that was billed as being very racy. And there's a thing in that book where Friedman says, we would go through the South, and we would go into a town and rent a theater and put on Mom and Dad. And he said sometimes guys from the Knights of Columbus would come down, or some organization, for decency, would come down, and they'd picket the movie theater and say, don't go see this sinful movie. And then you'd really sell out the theater because everyone wanted to see it. And he said, if we went to a town and nobody showed up to picket it, I'd hire a few guys to come picket it. And that's exactly where the John Sayles and Dick Miller characters in Matinee come from, is from that anecdote. And so, that book and those guys very much also inform the John Goodman character. That's the part other than William Castle. He's a kid, but he's also very much a carny. He's a traveling carnival guy who's somehow got one foot in the movie business, and that's that's thanks to that book and those people.
Yeah, it's true. A scandal is always free advertising.
Absolutely.
I was reminded of an anecdote. My religious education teacher back in high school told me when he went to see Life of Brian, the Monty Python movie. I don't know if you're familiar with that. They had nuns picketing, everybody on the street and telling them not to go see that movie because, you go straight to hell if you go see that movie because it makes fun of religion. And so obviously, everybody wanted to see the movie. That's that's a given. If you have nuns telling you not to do something.
You can't beat it. That's great.
Yeah, always. I also thought that the Woolsey character is sort of a composite of a lot of different producers. I think Roger Corman also plays into that.
Well, sure.
With the type of movie he makes.
Yeah, that's a good point because Joe had worked for Roger,
Mm,
and Mike had, and there's there's kind of a group of people in Hollywood who who worked for Roger at AIP or New World or wherever, and who sort of survived and learned from that experience of dealing with him, and they never get over it. I mean, it's just one of
mm,
these things that because he's this great crazy character who they
mm,
all worked for. The book about him, I don't know if you've seen the Roger Corman book.
mm-hmm,
Is a sort of oral history of people working for him. Have you seen that?
mm-hmm.
Uh, Something like How I Made 100 Movies and
Yeah,
Never
I
Lost
never
a
lost a dime. I've
Yeah.
read it, yeah.
And so all these people I knew in LA, Jonathan Kaplan and Alan Arkish, John Davison, Joe and Mike, all these people are interviewed in there. And yeah, it gives you a sense of Roger that I think you're right. I think it does come through in Woolsey.
Hmm. Yeah, I think what connects the two also is the fact that Lawrence Woolsey very much loves what he's doing. You get the
Yeah,
feeling that it's so much fun for him. He may be a showman, and he's sort of like a playing tricks on everybody and stuff like that. But he's not fake. He loves what he's doing.
absolutely right. Yeah,
This connection between the horror of the screen and the horror that plays on real life. That's sort of the theme of the movie. I was looking at your other work, and I was sort of trying to find an overall theme that sort of connects all of that. You see, there's the literature student in me that's coming through. um, so I was thinking that the loss of innocence would be something that plays into a lot of your work. Would you agree?
sure. I mean, I think that's certainly true of a couple movies that Tim Hunter and I did,
Mm-hmm.
Over the Edge and Tex, in different ways. They're both these two different pictures with Matt Dillon, and Jonathan Kaplan directed Over the Edge, and then Tim
Mm-hmm.
Hunter directed Tex. But they're very much about that for the kids. I mean, the kids in Over the Edge, if they have any innocence going into it, get divested of it pretty quickly by the second or third act of that picture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean Carl in Over the Edge, he's basically because he's our stand-in in a way. He's a good kid, and he sort of gets drawn into this whole mess, and then the wrong crowd maybe, or just the frustration of living in that particular town. All of that's
Yeah,
so. I guess there's the loss of innocence that plays into that.
for sure. Yep.
And I noticed that because you made another movie with Joe Dante that very much connects with Matinee. It's Runaway Daughters.
Oh yeah,
Because again, that's almost the same period, and it also has you have that movie at the beginning. I was a teenage werewolf, and you have
right.
a real life incident, the Sputnik launch
Yeah.
that people are talking about. Did that grow out of Matinee? Was that somehow connected?
What happened with that was that I'm sure you probably know this. It's from a series of cable TV remakes of AIP pictures.
Mm-hmm.
You know this that I guess it was Showtime had a series where they had well-known directors come in and do remakes of AIP things like I think they did I Was a Teenage Werewolf, and they did all the teenage movies and horror movies and stuff that AIP had done. Again, going back to Roger Corman, and I think Jonathan Kaplan did one, Mary Lambert did one, Joe did this one, and so forth. So it's very much an affectionate remake of this AIP thing. And so Joe sent me a cassette of the original movie, which had been shot in 5 days, which was how a lot of those, it happened that Joe and Mike at that time had this wonderful assistant, this woman, working and running their business and stuff, Betty Moss, who had worked at AIP at that time. And I said, God, did they really make those movies in 5 days? And she said, yeah, it was great. We had a wrap party every Friday. so, uh, and I think we made ours in 12 days. I mean, I think it was
Wow,
almost as fast and cheap as an AIP picture. And they were just somewhere, I visited one day, and they were just somewhere way the hell out in the North San Fernando Valley shooting this thing. And I think it was, it was maybe a year after MATINEE, very close on the heels of it. I was traveling, and Joe called up and said, do you want to get involved in this thing? It's very cheap and it doesn't pay anything, but we'll have fun. And I said, great. And I think it was kind of a way for us to sort of calm down from the whole MATINEE thing, which had been such a roller coaster with the financing in the studio and all this stuff that you go through. And this was just something we knew we could do cheaply and quickly, and and not have to worry all the time. And it really was very nice to get back together and do that, and do it without all the studio neurosis. It was a nice thing to do.
Mm-hmm. And some points it feels like it's a companion piece.
It very much is. It is. It was so soon afterward, but we just wanted to what if we did this without, because MATINEE was one of those things, like we went through this also on Over the Edge, where you never quite know if you've really raised the money to make the movie until you're making the movie, and it's nerve-wracking, and we didn't have any of that with this one, because it was just cheap and Showtime, great, go, do it.
I see. So MATINEE was much more of a struggle, I guess.
Yeah, it was, as these things often are, I think, and I have been out of Hollywood for a while now, but my memory of it, my experience of it is that unless you're making a sequel for a studio and everyone involved is very, as they used to say, bankable, unless it's that, there is always this question of, whether you have the money and whether you have distribution and whether you're really making this movie. And very often the answer is no, you're not making it. And then on rare occasion you are,
Yeah, unfortunately, it's such a tough business, and a lot of good projects are never made. I read that you and Joe Dante actually had another project that you didn't really manage to get off the ground, the Termite Terrace.
Yeah. That was kind of a heartbreaker, because we worked on it a long time. We thought we had a pretty good script, and it was just something that would have to have been done at Warner Brothers, because they owned the cartoon characters. It was a movie about the Looney Tunes animators, and Warner Brothers, of course, owns those characters. So normally, you develop something at a certain studio, and at some point, if they say no, you say, okay, well, we'll take it across the street, and you go to the other studios. In this case, you couldn't do that, so we didn't make the movie.
What would the story have been of Termite Terrace?
Termite Terrace was just kind of, it's a fictionalized story about Chuck Jones and Tex Avery and Bob Clampett and these guys making Looney Tunes at Warner Brothers and the old Warner Hollywood lot, not Burbank, but the one in Hollywood. And they had a building where they animated and did these cartoons that they called Termite Terrace. It was this old, falling down wooden building. And it was just kind of fictionalized, but those guys and their lives making cartoons in Hollywood in the 30s and 40s.
It's very unfortunate that one didn't get made.
Yeah, I think what they say in LA is that everybody's got one of those, that the picture that got away that they wish they'd been able to do. And I think that I have a few actually, but that's the number one. Yeah.
Okay. Uh, which other projects did you have that you would really have wanted to make?
Oh, I did. I did an adaptation of a German comedy called "To Err Is Human" for
Hmm.
Ben Stiller's company that we thought was pretty good, but we never quite got there. Probably a couple others. I mean, you work on a lot of stuff, and I mean, now I'm pretty old, and it all seems less tragic and urgent and everything. But at
Hmm.
the time you're working on things, you get very involved in them and very invested, and you at a certain point you realize that um, you know a minority of the things that you work on will be realized, and that's how that business is.
Hmm. So was that why you sort of left Hollywood after a while?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, and and I'm still a little bit in it because Tim Hunter and I have been working on an idea for a
Mm.
TV thing, but by and large, yeah, I had wanted to write fiction for a long time, and it also seemed like in Hollywood you get old at a very young age. It's like I don't know, obviously a lot of people keep working and doing good work after they're 40, but it gets harder.
Mm.
And it's frustrating when you work on things like Termite Terrace and they don't happen, and a few other things. And there was a point where I said, boy, if I'm going to writing fiction as a whole other thing to learn how to do, and if I'm going to try and learn that and do it, I better do it before I get really old and lose my brains. So that was it.
Hmm. I see. Yeah, and as a novelist, you're more in control of the finished product, whereas as a screenwriter, you're sort of at the mercy of the producers and the directors and everybody else who has a say in um, how to translate it to the screen, right?
Yeah, and at a certain point, I sort of a little bit of a light bulb went on for me about screenwriting, where I realized that the way that I could think about it comfortably and understand it was that it was the closest analogy to it was being a movie soundtrack composer, which sounds a little weird because the composer is not involved in story or any of that. But I said, really your job here is, you are not the author. The director is really the author. And like the composer, you are just supplying everything you can come up with to the director, and the director is choosing what to use, and it is the director's uh, story to tell.
Hmm.
And you can come up with ideas and dialogue, and let's have this character, all this other stuff, but it's the director's decision, the same way that the composer is, can come up with music cues all day, but it's up to the director. And you are just, working for hire and trying to help this person make a movie.
Hmm.
And once I understood it in that way, it made a lot more sense to me what I was doing for a living.
Hmm.
Also, I really love movie music, so it gave me something to look up to. I started thinking, oh, Jerry Goldsmith, that's a great thing to do.
Hmm. Yeah, it's true.
And I think that was true of me, and I would not go around saying that that's true of people. I mean, we know, my wife and I know David and Janet Peoples,
Hmm.
who wrote 12 Monkeys and stuff. To me, those are screenwriters who are really literary creators,
Hmm.
and I think what they are doing is much more analogous to writing novels because they really are, doing the literary work in the movies.
Hmm.
So I'm not saying they're like soundtrack. I'm saying I was like a soundtrack composer.
Hmm. I see. Did you set out to become a screenwriter, or did you have some other career in mind before that?
Uh, I wanted to do any sort of writing I could do for a living. I
Hmm.
did a lot of magazine journalism, and I wanted to write fiction. I ended up doing that now, but No, you know, and I had always loved movies, but I had not thought of writing for them. And I went to college, and the guy teaching the film classes where I went to college was Tim Hunter.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, he had been to Harvard, he had been to the AFI. He was teaching film history, and so I took all these classes that Tim was teaching, westerns and Howard Hawks and John Ford and
Mm-hmm.
Hitchcock and film noir and all this stuff. This really sort of mini crash course, you know, film history education. And Tim at some point said to me, you know, we should try writing together, and we started writing, you know, what ended up being Over the Edge. So I really just kind of stumbled into it through knowing Tim, and Tim was another guy who had like Joe, you know, had this you know, this life through childhood and college of total immersion and in movies and knowledge of movies, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Again, another real scholar of this stuff.
Mm-hmm. I see. And Over the Edge was your first movie then, that
Yes.
you wrote with Tim. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was his idea.
Mm-hmm.
Based on a newspaper story that he saw about what was actually happening. We were in Santa Cruz, and this stuff was going on in Foster City, California, near San Francisco. And we started going up there and interviewing the kids, and then developed the story from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I read that Kurt Cobain said at one point that the movie defined his entire personality. Did you hear
It
about
was
that?
very strange. Yeah, there's a documentary about him that has clips of Over the Edge in it and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I was always sort of surprised and touched by that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it captures a kind of feeling of, well, let's call it the American nowhere, I guess.
Yeah.
This kind of
Well said, yeah.
anonymous suburb.
Yep.
And I've seen that in a couple of people's biographies where they say, well, I grew up in so-and-so, and the way they describe it, that's exactly the town of Over the Edge.
Yeah.
Say, well, there's nothing to do there. There's just, you go crazy if you grow up there.
Yeah, there was nothing to do, and you know, and you know, Foster City, the place where the stuff happened that it's very loosely based on, looks like that. And then when we realized that the child labor laws in California would make it impossible to make a movie with 14-year-olds in California because it would just be too expensive,
Mm-hmm.
we started looking, and boy, you could have made it all over America. I mean, you know, everywhere you went, there were developments that looked like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I traveled through America at one point, through Minnesota, because I was in an exchange program with the University of Minnesota, so I traveled around quite a little bit, and I was surprised at all these little towns and all these suburbs and all these, you know, everything sort of looks alike there, and
Yeah.
and they all seem so empty. That's what I found so amazing, that you didn't really see people on the streets or you know, people going about their business or anything. They seemed like ghost towns in a way.
There's a wonderful novel that you may have read, but if not, I recommend it highly, by Stanley Elkin, called The Franchiser,
Mm-hmm.
which is about that.
Mm-hmm.
And I won't go into it because I won't take your time. But if you get a chance, it's a wonderful book.
And I think you described a little bit of that America in your novel too, right?
Oh,
in
yeah.
The Enthusiast.
Yeah. He's running around. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly where he grows up in that book, in San Bernardino County, it looks like that. It's funny because San Bernardino County is not a big setting in that one, because he's itinerant and he's going around, and there's 7-Elevens and stuff, and it's what you're talking about. But the thing I'm writing now is set almost in, it starts in Germany, but the rest of it is set in San Bernardino County once again, which is a place I don't know that well, but I've been there.
Mm-hmm.
but it's about 100 years ago. There were these sort of German expressionist art and nature freaks who came from Germany to Southern California, and sort of the California hippie thing starts with them.
Mm-hmm.
This is like 1914, and I have them coming to that same area, Redlands, San Bernardino County. So, somehow I'm there again.
Mm-hmm. You seem like you're drawn to these kinds of places.
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
Yeah. I mean, Matinee is sort of Key West, that's a very specific place, but still it could be anywhere. It's just a town where you have a movie, where you have a movie theater with a huge movie opening there.
Right, except that it's, and the one catch there is that it's so close to Cuba.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, true.
And so you have the blockade and, and all this stuff was going on there.
Mm-hmm. I was wondering while I was looking at the other stuff that you've done, that you wrote a draft of TRON.
Yeah.
But you're not credited in the movie?
No, it was it was a weird thing. I was sort of we were kind of hanging around at Disney because Tim and I had done techs at Disney, and then they were getting ready to make TRON, and which at the time was this very advanced computer effects picture. They were really doing new stuff, and I don't know that much about the technical stuff, but apparently it was this very difficult, expensive, painstaking kind of process they were using, and so they were very close to shooting, and the studio came to me and said, look, this is about to go, and we're not really happy with all the dialogue, and do you want to do a production dialogue polish? And I said, okay, and I was hired. The deal was that you couldn't, that the sequences were completely locked. The story was locked, but it was also scene by scene. It has to be these actors in this setting, and this is what happened. You cannot change a single thing about that. This is done. All you can do, it's like going through a comic book and changing only the speech balloons. All you can do is revise the dialogue. And I said, got it. And so I stayed up for 10 days or 2 weeks or something, and I just worked day and night. I was young, and changed a bunch of the dialogue, and a bunch of stuff I used, I wrote, was used in the movie, and I get a special thanks credit. And I was in it up through the table readings, and making changes, and they used a nice amount of what I had done, and I think under the Writers Guild rules, there was no way I would ever have gotten a credit because the rules lean heavily towards story. And back in the 30s and 40s, there used to be this other credit called additional dialogue, but that had been gone for a long time by the time I worked on it. So really, there was no reason I would have had a credit on it. But I did work on it.
I see. Yeah, I found the script that you wrote on the internet. It's actually on one of the pages where you can find screenplays to movies. And it says fourth draft, but it doesn't have any of the other drafts, so it's impossible to compare with what's come before that. I just noticed that it's very close to the actual movie.
I don't know. I don't know how you would find the other people's drafts, but I remember doing it, and I like those people. I liked Steve Lisberger. I thought it was very nice.
But the film is sort of an anomaly in your other work, I think.
Oh yeah, definitely. But I was at that age and at that time in my life where I was young and I had a lot of energy, and people would ask you if you wanted to do stuff, and you sort of, yeah, sure, sounds good. Why not? Sounds like fun. I would not do now, but I did then,
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's nice to have a movie like Tron on your resume. I mean,
Yeah, it's
it's
just funny. It's funny.
it's a
I mean,
cult
you
classic.
want your life to have been colorful and, and
Yeah.
amusing, and there it is, right?
Yeah, you want to have stories to tell and everything.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. Yeah.
well, going back to Matinee for a moment, because I said Tron is such a cult movie, and I guess Matinee it's almost a cult movie, but I think it didn't really have that kind of impact. So I was wondering how you received the whole reception of the movie, how you sort of how much did you read the reviews? How much did you follow the like the life of the movie, that kind of thing?
I will tell you how I feel about this, and this is, perhaps self-serving, but it really is true. Well, the first thing to say is that back in 20 years ago, when there were when you could go to video stores and rent movies, we had a video store near us, where we live here, and I would go there, and it was probably VHS at that point, but everything I had worked on was in the cult section, right? And, it was and nowhere else. But it was like cult movie number one, number two, and which is fine.
Mm,
And the other thing about this is that it takes you forever to learn this. And I mean, I'm about to be 68 years old, and it took me a long time to understand this. But you do something, and there's an initial response to it, and then 10 and 20 and 30 years go by, and there is a completely different estimation of that thing, at
mhm,
least by some people. There is a very different understanding of what that was you were doing. And if you take it really seriously when you initially do something, which you sort of can't help doing, but it can be quite painful. When Over the Edge came out, or sort of came out because it was barely released, but when that movie came out, the trade reviews, Variety and the Hollywood Reporter, were scathing. They were the worst reviews you ever saw in your life. They were vicious. And I
wow.
read those reviews, and and I'm a boy, I'm a young boy, and I read these things, and I said, geez, it's over. I'm done. I
Mm,
can't. I'm not going to work anymore. And I'm sitting at the magazine where I worked, and I'm reading the trade papers. And, oh my God! And a year later, Joseph Papp, it screens at the Joseph Papp's Public Theater in New York, and we get these great reviews in the New York Times and the Chicago Tribune and the Village Voice. And so all of a sudden it's a good movie.
mm,
And all of these things, places that give them bad reviews or say what a dud or whatever at the time, years later, the Blu-ray comes out, or the DVD, whatever it is, or there's a revival screen, or it's streaming somewhere. Now they write this thing saying, well, here's this great movie you can see this weekend because it's streaming. And you say, great movie, you were the people who panned this, but what? Of
mm,
course, it's a different writer, and years have gone by. But, the estimation of these things changes over time. So you just kind of, you have to cool it, and you have to get old. Then when you get old, you say, oh, this was all right, actually. you know, in our fumbling way, we kind of did something some people liked, but it takes a long time for people to catch up with it,
mm.
through cable TV or stream or whatever, and and it takes a long time for the consensus, for the critical consensus on something to change. So you have to wait and get old.
Mm. Yeah,
Not so bad.
sometimes it takes an entire generation until something gets the appreciation it deserves.
Yeah, and it happens. I won't say it happens to everyone, because a lot of things are are very good and people get it right away, and but there's a lot of things that take time.
Mm. So yeah, Matinee, I think, is well, it's well regarded nowadays, but
Now, yeah,
still,
sure, now.
even though the reviews back then, I think most of the reviews were good. I mean, I checked some of them, and like even the reviewers who weren't totally wowed by it, even they sort of found something to like and sort of acknowledged what you were doing and still said, well, this is a charming film. And so I didn't really find any absolutely negative reviews. So that's interesting.
No, it wasn't bad. I remember, and again, you take these things, you have to. I took this very seriously at the time. I remember the day the movie opened, my wife and I were at home, we were listening to the radio, and there was a review of it on public radio in the US, and the reviewer just gave it a lovely review and just said, this is great, and it really examines fear and what we go through, and it's really about something, and it's very good, and he does such a nice job, Joe, and all this stuff. And then concludes the review by saying, unfortunately, Universal is dumping this picture.
Oh.
And you're sitting there, and I'm just, what are you going to think? I mean, you just, okay, good. That's on the radio. It's just So, and at the time, it's a very big deal to you,
Yeah. Well, of course, it's something that you spent a lot of time and energy on, and it's sure. a project that takes, it takes up so much time that becomes a very personal thing, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
I think the reviews of Gremlins 2 back then, they weren't that flattering either, right? They were very...
Trying to remember. I think I think the reviews were on Gremlins 2 were good. New York Times liked it a lot. The trades liked it a lot. I think even David Denby liked it. I'm trying to remember. I think. Oh, there was a lovely piece about it in the New Yorker, because it was about the fact that and Dick Tracy were opening the same day, and it drew an analogy between the different approaches of Disney and Warner Brothers of the two movies, comparing the two movies as a Disney project and a Warner Brothers project relative to Mickey Mouse and Looney Tunes, and sort of making an analogy in the stylistic differences. And it was a lot, it was this very nice appreciation of the picture. So that one, I think more people got right away. Even though it had the disadvantage in the US of being released against Dick Tracy, I think people appreciated it pretty early.
Yeah, I always loved it's like it has a very anarchic spirit to it. It's almost like a satire of the original movie. It sort of slaughters so many holy cows of horror cinema and everything. I mean, that's basically an anything goes movie. And I've rarely seen a movie that throws so many ideas and references and craziness into one package. And I mean, that's a part two. That's not telling the same story again, but it's sort of turning everything upside down.
And I was very happy doing that for Joe, because I love doing that sort of thing. I was slow to catch on to how far he wanted to go in that direction. Once I caught on, I was thrilled, because it was fun. We had a lot of fun. And I always tell this, but I'll repeat it. I remember when I finally understood what was happening was when I said to him, talking about the John Glover character, Clamp, I said, boy, I'm writing this, and the guy is turning out to be the character's turning out to be very broad. And Joe just instantly said, how broad? Can we get Danny Kaye? Aha! Now I see what we're doing here,
Yeah, when you watch a movie nowadays, the Clamp character is always a very interesting, very interesting character.
Not so funny now.
Nah, not so much. It's
No.
almost like a time capsule of how did people see Donald Trump back at the end of the 80s.
Yeah. And I read his book working on that, and I said, all this guy does is borrow money and go bankrupt. Why is he writing a book about this?
And bragging about it too.
Yeah, bragging about it. But here we are, awful.
Yeah, it's true. But yeah, you look at the Clem character and you're like, yeah, of course. I mean, he's a caricature, but still he's so likable. He's
Yeah. Well, John Glover is wonderful.
mm,
I just think he's great in that.
mm.
Very funny.
And how did you get on board of Gremlins 2 in the first place?
Jonathan Kaplan, whom I mentioned earlier, who wonderful,
Mm-hmm.
director, and he directed Over the Edge, and he went on and did The Accused and all this great stuff, and then a lot of very good television. He was friends with Joe. I think that was the Roger Corman connection once again.
Mm-hmm.
They both worked for Roger, and he ran into Joe, and Joe said, we haven't yet come up with a suitable script for this sequel. And Jonathan said, well, why don't you call Charlie? So they called me, and they told me that Mike told me that they were looking to get out of the small town setting, to do something in a big city, but you can't have these puppets running down the street in New York because it's too expensive. So you have to contain it somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, and we want to see some variations on the monsters. So I came back to them and said, well, what about the smart office building? And what about a genetics lab so that you get the mutations? And then he and Joe then instantly started, running with it and sort of saying, oh, Donald Trump, Ted Turner, cable TV, all this stuff that, that they added into it. And then the three of us just sort of, just kind of jammed and came up with the thing.
Mm-hmm. I see. Was that something where the studio was kind of uncomfortable with the direction the project was going?
I think they would have been, except that they had made a lot of money on part one, and they just wanted to make money again. So they're, yeah, great. Joe wants to do it. Fine. Okay. So they were, we went in and pitched it to them, and yeah, I think on any, if it had been an original, I think they would have said, I don't know. And on this, they said, great, go to work. You need a new computer? We'll send you a new computer. So they were very nice. They were happy.
Mm-hmm. Because I mean, that is a quality that many Joe Dante movies have. He's almost subversive in a way. Like I said,
Yeah.
it's like a satire of the first film. He's almost destroying the whole Gremlins legacy with the film because he's making fun of it, or you two are making fun of it. And I always imagine that, well, I don't know, people will be very nervous about doing such a film.
Well, I think he is just enormously talented and clever and sneaky, and he gets a lot of things, a lot of ideas into movies that other directors might not. So I think Joe's wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any other films except for Termite Terrace that you were planning to do that sort of didn't come to fruition?
With Joe?
Yeah.
No, I worked a little bit on, some other things they were thinking of doing, but nothing that was a big deal.
Mm. Just because I was curious that you sort of had this time frame where you collaborated on a couple of projects that sort of followed each other very quickly. That ended after a while, I guess.
Yeah.
Mm.
We worked on Termite Terrace for a long time. So really there were several years there. And then, I kind of decided to to cool it and to try to write the book and stuff. So we, and he had some other things he did. He did Small Soldiers after that, and a bunch of stuff. So.
Mm-hmm. So when you look back at the films that you've done, how happy are you with how everything turned out?
Oh, very. Because I never. I'm happy because people who seem smart to me have liked them and have figured them out and have seen something good in there. And I never could have expected to make that many movies because it's very hard. I never would have expected to get so much out of collaborating with people, because as a writer and not knowing about the movies, I didn't realize, what that relationship with directors, and actors was like. And I got so much out of working with Tim and Jonathan and Joe and Mike and and a few other people developing things. And I really, and now there's like, I don't know if you've seen it, but there's this Twitter account someone has called the Institute for Gremlins 2 Studies. Have you seen it?
No.
Very funny. It's very smart. We don't know who it is. We think it's someone in New York. We think it's someone who's an academic. And he or she is writing, this Twitter feed that is stuff about Gremlins 2 that is like, it's as if Slavoj Žižek was writing about Gremlins 2. Mm-hmm. It's this, leftist Marxist philosophical deconstruction of Gremlins 2 and Gremlins 2 as a vehicle for social criticism. Mm-hmm. And it's funny and it's overinterpretive, but it's not completely overinterpretive. Like the guy is not, or gal is not wrong. I see something like that now and I think, okay, this in its nutty way was worthwhile. Mm-hmm. So I'm very happy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see.
Things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it means you're connected with people. It's
yeah, exactly.
Hmm. And I mean, it's a movie that's 30 years old, so I think that means something, that people are still going back to that and talking about it and enjoying it.
Yeah, it's very nice. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty grateful.
So one thing I forgot to ask about Matinee, and I'll just have to tuck it in at the end because I've never seen it discussed anywhere, and I just wanted to ask you about the beautiful poetry of Mr. Starkweather.
Yeah. I know. I did a draft, and I had the Kelly Martin character. I had her line about, well, did you know that Harvey writes poetry? And no, I didn't know that. And and we had our meeting at the studio. I think the executive was probably Lisa Henson or Lucy Fisher, I'm not sure, but whoever it was said, now, come on, we got to hear the poetry. If you're going to say he writes poetry, you got to. So I got to write that. It was fun.
Did you have anybody in mind when you wrote that?
Any poet in mind?
Yeah. Like, is it a parody of somebody?
No, it really isn't, because I just wanted it to be, what this dopey guy would have written if he. And it's just silly, but it was really fun to do. I mean, I read a lot of poetry, but I don't think it brings anyone to mind.
It's the skin of my asphalt.
Yeah.
I think that's a great line. I was thinking that maybe Allen Ginsberg and Howe were somehow.
Oh, that's interesting.
It has such a beat poetry quality to it.
It is a little beat, yeah, a little bit. I keep Ginsberg's poem "America." Mm-hmm. It's a shorter poem. Mm-hmm. I've reread it many times in recent years because I reread that poem and I think Well, it's 1955 or something, but it's all there.
Mm.
The whole contemporary situation is there.